what do we got? Well, you could look at exciting a la carte buzzwords like AR, VR, smart glasses, contacts, Neuralink. It's just a chain of interaction that goes back 150 years.
Hello and welcome to another Coffee with Mr. IoT. My name is Robert Schmidt. I am Deloitte's Chief IoT Technologist and also known as Mr. IoT. And today to my show, we have Michael Bechtel. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Robert. Thank you for having me, pronouncing my name more correctly than I can, and giving me an excuse to drink even more coffee.
I just had a conversation with my wife. We started playing this game called Mensch ärgere dich nicht. And so I tried to teach my wife the name of the game. And it has like two in there. So Mensch ärgere dich nicht. Like you have in Bechtel, right? There's Bechtel, there's a CH in there.
Right.
So my advantage of having Austrian heritage. So
yeah,
anyhow.
Wow. By the end of our coffee conversation, I want to try and fail to pronounce that. That's very exciting.
Michael, you are Deloitte's Chief Futurist. What an exciting title.
Yeah.
And how exciting to be here with you. I hope you can give me some insights about what the future is. I think it's one of those times where, I don't know, I feel the future is one of the most unknown right now compared to quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your title.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe riff a little bit what you feel about future. About the future, I should say.
Yeah, for starters, Robert, I mean, you walk into a meeting or coffee with Mr. IoT or any context, and it's like you say you're a futurist. You neatly divide the room into two constituent groups, right? You've got the people who lean forward and they go, "Ooh, this is neat," and then you've got the group of folks who say, "Oh, goodness gracious, look at this clown," right? Like, what is this going to be about? And I think that reaction is understandable because there's a temptation to think of the future as either crystal clear, right? Like, oh yeah, we can divine the future, prediction, of course, trend lines, or to see it as completely opaque, right? It's not worth studying, can't be seen, fool's game, mug's game, skeptics, you name it. What I've come to learn in my role and over my career is both of those groups are wrong. The future is neither transparent nor opaque. It's translucent, which is a really nerdy word. But translucent, it's like a shade, right? You can make out the shapes and shadows, if not the fine details. And so, like a marbly privacy window, we look through it to see what's coming, not when it's coming, not precisely what's coming, but to get a sense of blockers, sources of light, headwinds, tailwinds. It's a strategic discipline if it's done with the right mix of humility and I think rigor.
So I'm curious always about this duality of how we show up at work and how we show up at home or in our personal lives. And when you have a title like Chief Futurist, tell me a little bit about that translucent term. What does that mean for work for you? And how does that translate for you in your personal life? Are you the Chief Futurist in your household too?
I'm just laughing because I in this world where the office is like 8-foot commute from the kitchen.
True.
I can assure you my whole family would scoff at the idea that I know what's happening next. Because my better half, and not to make this gendered or anything less than progressive and equity filled, my wife Barb is the CEO of our household, and she would tell you I run around like a chicken with my head cut off. I don't know whether it's soccer practice or baseball next. Happy to coach it. But what I would tell you is, personally, I got into futurism as an interest and then as a career, because I happened to luck into working in emerging technologies out of the gate after college. So, in college, I was a political science and anthropology major with a minor in philosophy and economics. And nothing terribly futuristic about that, right, man? Like that's looking backwards. And so because it was 1998, right, you would interview for firms, like a Deloitte, like an Accenture, like you name them, right? And all they heard was internet, right? I could spell, www or HTTP, and I was one of them, their newfangled web developers. And so I ended up working for a emerging technology innovation group at a large consultancy. And I was up to my ears in novelty. I mean, for 11 years, we were inventing and commercializing, right? You'd invent it and then you'd sell it. You'd invent it and then you'd sell it and deliver it. And some people do that and they get novelty fatigue, right? There's this word neophilia, right? Neophilic, to be obsessed with the new. I was more one of those. I found that rather than getting passionate about any one newfangled tech, I really liked the whole smorgasbord, right? Like all of it. I got off on novelty more so than any given innovation. And so it was with that realization that, after a series of twists and turns, I'll spare everybody the boredom, but I became a venture capitalist, sort of on the other side of the table, trying to divine profitability out of possibility, and then found my way here to Deloitte, where we try to make heads or tails, see the forest for the trees, try to see the pattern beyond the pattern, and help our clients understand what's next.
So you talk about emerging technologies. And by the way, this is probably more a philosophical conversation, but I almost wonder, when you said you invent and then you sell and then you invent and then you sell or commercialize, really, right? Yeah. But I almost have like this, the immediate reaction I had was, you can't split the two because you got to invent while you are commercializing, or you got to commercialize while you invent, because otherwise I think you're inventing around things that aren't real. But that's just, I don't know, maybe you disagree. It was just something that sort of popped in my head.
I mean,
it's the agile approach, really, if you think about it, right?
Well, it is, Robert. I mean, one of my favorite quotes, I don't even know who wrote the quote. I just have their IP address because I traced a Wikipedia sentence in the article on innovation, circa 2006, to some person in Ohio. So I know they're from Ohio. Right?
Okay.
We narrowed it down to 5 million. But they said invention is the conversion of cash into new ideas. Innovation is the conversion of new ideas into cash. And I thought,
Interesting. So you make the differentiation between invention and innovation. I like it. That's super interesting.
Well, I thought so too, because I feel like innovation is one of these squishy, it's anything anybody needs it to be. It's like synergy or leverage or something. And the more time I spent working in newfangled technologies, the more times I realized that if you're leading with, as you said, inventions, if you're inventing around something, there's a better than average chance the market doesn't want what you're selling, right? Like companies are littered. The first baby steps so many organizations take to innovating is they open the dreaded idea suggestion box, right? And, right? I mean, I see your face smiling. You've seen it, where it's like, yeah, give us your ideas. No idea is a bad idea. It's not that they're bad. It's just that they're rarely in service of a problem we're solving. And so, the innovator, in my experience, is less interested in the ideas and more interested in leading with need in those problems we're solving. That way you're saying, all right, we've got an itch to scratch. Then you dispatch the ideation people. guess what? They come up with things that help. So yeah, invention usually leads with ideas. Innovators usually lead with a problem we're solving.
I have to say, I wish I found myself just sort of like sitting and thinking, what if we'd have, like, as a third person now, if we could have, from heaven, Steve Jobs with us, I wonder if he'd argue that the iPhone would have never been innovated if it would have not been an invention first. So it's an interesting kind of dilemma to sit on both sides. And so I'd be curious what people like him would have to say on that.
Yeah.
But let me take us into something very concrete. You talked about emerging technologies. Give us a few of the technologies that you as a chief futurist really are thinking about. And, I'm going to actually challenge you not to say IoT because we talk so much about IoT. Sure. Talk to me about other things and why you're thinking of them. And yeah. I'd be curious also when you talk about them, in what time horizon are you thinking about them?
Yeah, no, happily, man. So one of our central conceits, right, or organizing frameworks in our team's work, we call our team NEXT, Novel and Experimental Technologies. One of our central ideas is this notion that emerging tech tends to be the province of short-term attention spans, fads. It's a blizzard of buzzwords. And so to quote good old Henry David Thoreau, right? My liberal arts background is showing, but he said, "Read not the times, read the eternities," which was his way of saying, if you get lost in the zeitgeist in today's news, you miss out on the relevant decade or century level movements. So that's to say, when we look at which emerging techs are interesting, we start the party not in 2020 or even 2025. We start the party in 1839. Now, this is going to, if I'm a listener, I'm like, oh, brother, here we go. But I promise we'll keep this tidy.
I'm like, whoa, I don't know where that's going to go. I'm like, Great. Whoa, where are we going here? Go for it.
So there's a locomotive. Now, here's the idea. Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace, right, co-invented the first computer design. Okay, we always hear about the 1940s and ENIAC and all that, but that was the first digital computer. The first computer dates back to the 1830s. And when you read their notes about it was called the difference engine. There's a model of it in Menlo Park. It's adorable is the word I would use when they describe the parts. They'd say, like, we presume the existence of a reader which allows for the reading of the results. You're like, okay, user interface. Like, and a mill, which will tabulate the results. You're like, okay, a processor, and you gotta love mill, right? Because what's this like? Well, it's like a flour mill. It's a mill. And then there's a store for the numbers and the data to be tabulated by the mill. Well, as a futurist, right, I'm a closet historian. And as I read that description, I say, well, these folks kind of called the classic three-tier architecture over 150 years ago. It's a UI, it's a compute, and it's a memory, right? So interaction, computation, information. Fast forward, 1998, I'm working on Web 1.0 websites, for eatandearn.com, like a loyalty website for Kellogg's. So kids could buy cereals and put in codes and get stuff. It was great. But I remember our architecture designs, 3 tiers, UI, business logic, data. Fast forward to current, right? What do we got? Well, you could look at exciting a la carte buzzwords like AR, VR, smart glasses, contacts, Neuralink. It's just a chain of interaction that goes back 150 years. And so to answer your question, what's new and exciting on interaction? It's this tripartite move from sit down, click and type. That's the 10-year ago story. The story lately, right? Touch and swipe, lean back. What's new is anything and everything beyond the glass, beyond the rectangle, right? So conversational voice, hey, Amazon, hey, Google, hey, whatever, right? AR, VR, right? Talking about it for 20 years, but it's ready now. And computer vision, right? Reading our face to deduct mood, emotion, et cetera, intent. That's what's new. Anything beyond the glass rectangle on interface. What's next? That's where it gets kind of fun. What's next is not even caring about the device. We call it ambient computing. So does MIT, like we didn't coin the term. But what's next on interaction, on UI, is this almost Star Trek idea of you ask a question not to a device, but to the universe. Like, I wonder what the weather is tomorrow. And the correct device, whether it's Amazon, Apple, Google, startup, Deloitte, you name it, the right device bids for your attention and proves its worth like a sort of digital Downton Abbey. So if today we have an all-purpose butler, tomorrow we have a maid and a footman and a valet and a butler and all this constellation of ambient devices that serve our needs without our having to know which bot to ask for which thing. So that's what we've got our eyes on interface. I'm going to take a breath because Lord knows we don't want to hear two more of those without a breath and a discussion.
Well, first of all, I got to say I'm not surprised now that you and Bill, our CTO, get along well, because I can see there is some similarity how you combine history with today. Fascinating thought that you go from sort of like keep the interaction as the level. I love this thing about bidding for content. In a way, I know we've had a lot of data. For me, like the last 10 years was we generate big data, but I really didn't feel we did anything meaningful with it because we just, as humans, had too much data now. And so this is why I'm looking forward to, maybe that's where you're going with compute, but now you're going to just tell me there's going to be more data. There's going to be so much data, because if you start taking the face and the voice and the tone of the voice, we're going to multiply the data from just a few swipes. I mean, swipes suddenly seem so benign because now you interpret if I swipe right or left. No pun intended, but that has its own connotation, I know. But you know what I mean, right? Your interaction, how you interact. But now you're going to take all that extra data. What do you do with all that data now? Who bids on it, and who's going to make the decision what it means?
Well, you know what's interesting on the data front, or one of the things we think is interesting is, back to the 1800s, right? U.S. money used to say, "In God we trust," and at some point it got turned to "E pluribus unum," right? Out of many, one, and both great sentiments, but the concept that we've been seeing over the long haul on data is that it used to be, okay, we trust in a higher power, it'll all be okay. And then as businesses, if not individuals, got more secular, it was, no, we're going to trust in counterparties, right? I'll trust in the government or Ford Motor Company or, the US Steel, like individual corporations. And what we've seen over the last 10 years with this rise of big data, with organizations knowing more about us than we know about us, is we're less likely to put trust in a singular counterparty. We're more likely to put trust in, well, frankly, you wait in a futurist talk for the B word to show up, blockchain. But blockchain's been a hammer looking for a nail for a decade. It's such a supply side story, like in my experience, hunting for demand. But what it portends is really this acknowledgement of, man, I don't know if I can trust anybody with my data. So rather than trust any one of us, I'm going to trust all of us. It's sort of in math we trust, right? And cyber folks will tell you, no, well, it's a trustless architecture, a zero trust. Yeah. But again, over that long sweep of history, what we're saying is none of us is as trustworthy as all of us. And so that's where I think data privacy is headed, is this idea of I'm going to control my own stuff and I'm going to offer it up to you in a read format but I'm gonna trust some distributed platform like a blockchain-based something to yank back or revoke rights for anything beyond what I authorized you to use.
So I got to ask you on this. This is interesting that you throw blockchain into this trust issue, and I get it totally when I ship stuff and I hand it over to you or someone, and then sort of like that sort of chain really makes sense to me. But for me, what I heard, and I want to make sure I heard that right, is you're actually expanding this to my opinion in a way, and then 5 other people's opinions, and then you take that opinion, or because weather is, there's no forecast of the weather that's ever right. It's one of the most complicated mathematical models. So now you're gonna get 5 weather people giving you their opinion on what the weather is, and then you put that in blockchain to trust it. Is that sort of like how you thought of it, or did I make too much out of this?
No, well, I'm picking up what you're putting down here because what you're seeing, and it's like that game of telephone, right? Some of the greatest ideas and innovations come off of like teeny tiny misunderstandings. And even if it was a misunderstanding, that we're heading somewhere cool. I mean, that's why it's a coffee chat. Is before there was blockchain, and a little bit before cloud was a household term, crowdsourcing was all the rage, right? And before it was even crowdsourcing, I remember my old lab, like before things get clever marketing names, they have terrible engineer names. And we called it massively parallel human grid computing. But the thought was, there are classes of problems that lend themselves to hundreds of participants, and you average the answer, right? Prediction markets sort of do that.
But this is where I was going to go with that, right? Because I was going to go to this now and say today, the reason I like this was because my biggest problem with crowdsourcing, and in a way, I've always felt of my social feed as being crowdsourced, if you wish, until the first time someone did a chart for me of what my social feed actually like what it consists of. It's like there was sort of like, where does my data come from? And then I think of how we hear all the influence that comes from outside into our social feed that's actually through bots and through real, very targeted information. And now we can argue if it's misinformation, whatever. I don't even want to go there, but that's not real crowdsourcing. That's people wanting to influence my crowd. But if I now layer on that this trust level of blockchain, correct, now my opinion suddenly, it's my opinion. It's for other people, and the bot that came in, that's not a true thing. So is that where you were going with this? What am I making out of this? Because I'm sorry, I'm getting philosophical here, but it fascinates me.
You get me and you together, this is where we're going to go. And I wouldn't have any I think, and I'm grateful for this discussion. I think that the wrong way to visit blockchain is, a triple ledger, distributed, we get it. The right way is the kind of door you're coming in, I think, Robert, where you're saying, the problem with diffuse problem solving, crowdsourcing, is a problem of accountability. It's a problem of truth telling, a problem of what a supply chain geek would call provenance, right? And that's where blockchain can be really, really handy, is saying, you can't trust this shipper to tell you where that thing came from. Just as in your example, you can't trust this tweet as far as you can throw it. But if you layer in a trustless architecture, wink, wink, blockchain, suddenly you can say, okay, no, the community crypto says this thing's legit. You might disagree with it, but you can at least trust its origin, right? Its provenance. So.
Gosh, I could go on for a long time. This is why these calls are most of the time my favorite calls of the week, because I get to stretch my imagination and think about stuff. Practical question for you. How does a company, how do we in Deloitte take these somewhat abstract, somewhat philosophical thoughts and make them into something real? When do I really, in your opinion, need to pull the trigger on something like this? When is it the time to take this? And what's your take on that?
For sure. It's it's the right question, and I won't be very long for this world if we don't have some thoughts around it, right? So back to that whole translucent piece we talked about early on. We look at futurism, technology futurism, right? My team isn't doing the climate stuff, the universal basic income stuff, year 3000. We're looking at technology futures. We are working towards the establishment of technology futurism as a strategic discipline, which in straight non-jargon talk means if I'm a technology leader, right, a CIO, a CTO, or whomever, my annual budgeting and planning process is typically incremental. How many servers do we have last year, Johnny? 6? Well, things are looking up. Let's get 7, right? And inertial, right? We do what we've done, right? Over to the side, you've historically had startups or universities running around talking about the new exciting stuff, and established companies look over to it and they say, well, that's interesting, but that's not us, right? And what happens is these tiny little businesses that have no business being in your business sneak up and put you out of business. Or increasingly a FANG company, right? Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, one of the bigs, looks in your direction and says, we could do that. Right? In both cases, as a tech leader, the extent to which you have a handle on where the tailwinds are going with respect to the big technology movements, that helps you go from being, with humility, a victim waiting to be disrupted to a player able to make acquisitions yourself, stand up innovation labs yourself, right? Disrupt yourself. And so in short, our whole where do you start thing, it's not about, hey, you should invest in ambient, right? Or emotional intelligence or in computing or any a la carte anything. It's you'd be wise to start sensing and sense making these tailwinds, because the business you're in 5 years from now might look a whole lot different from the business you're in now. And just pulling the lens back, stuff gets clear as day.
So let me try this back at you.
Yeah.
You're saying everybody needs to do some, because otherwise you run the risk of being either overtaken by someone out of the shadow, or someone takes it away from you that has more whatever, technology, people, skill set or whatever. So it's everybody should do some. It's not about which one, but it's us guiding them in terms of do something. Right.
It's everybody should have, when I give talks on emerging technology or technology futures to our clients, one of the first things we have to make clear is hey, it's not that what you're doing is wrong, right? Cloud, keep it up. Analytics, by all means, right? Core modernization, it's like eating your vegetables. You have to do all that stuff. But the more you can get to a high performing now, you kind of lower your technical debt, you lower your interest payments so you can begin to invest in the new. And, if you're a media and entertainment giant, you're going to need a higher ratio of new to keep people coming back. If you're a B2B firm, you might have a 5% innovation spend versus a 25. But in all cases, look forward and look around you, because somebody's coming after you. Well, that's something I learned in VC is, companies worry about their symmetrical competitors, right? There's an analogy here to the Gulf War. I don't know military. I'm not going to go there. But
no, I know what you mean. You look out for the ones that you know, but you forget the ones that's why I called them in the shadow of you, right?
Yeah.
You don't see them. They're behind you somewhere and you don't pay attention to them.
That's it. It's the big known richies or the tiny little guys getting funded by the richies. They're both super dangerous.
So I want to switch our conversation at the very end here to something totally different. And I want to tell you, you actually inspired me to pick something up again. I started it like when COVID really was in its very early days, and I was sitting around at home. I had like these coffee 15 minutes scheduled 4 days a week, and I just sent it to a bunch of people I worked with. And most days, one or two people showed up and we had a coffee chat. And after about a month or two, it kind of faded out. And then you and I started working together, and you just looked at me and said, hey, we work together a lot. I think we should get on a video call together and just chew the fat and get to know each other. And I was like, that is so awesome. And so my inspiration was, first of all, I wanted to get to know you, but the second was, I'm doing this with other people now, a lot more again. And so I want to say thanks for that, but I also want to sort of like, highlight, give you a chance to talk a little bit about where this comes from, this sort of like, being personal. One of the things I want to hear from you is, it's so important today in this video environment to be engaging on video. What do you do? I asked you this in our one-on-one, right? How do you keep up the energy the way you bring it forward? Yeah, just give us a little bit, sort of like, spin a little bit on that. Give us a little bit of you. A little bit of Michael, the Michael that you don't hear, the Michael we don't see.
Regular mic. Mic unplugged. Acoustic mic.
Mic unplugged. No, it's just sort of coaching on how to be more open on this and sort of like, what can people do? What do you do?
Robert, well, first of all, thanks for, it's cool to see that viral mojo of like, we're hanging and now you're hanging and people are hanging. I think I've always been a bit of an open book. And something I've learned about myself over the years is that my go-to punch is to create rather than compete. Which is a curious thing, right? Because I think, whether you go back to like awkward teenagers playing Dungeons and Dragons, or even more awkward references to like Star Trek II and the Kobayashi Maru, Google it. You can be a game player where there's winners and losers, or you can be a game master where you make the game and, you're just enjoying it and entertained and good cheer and the rest. And I think growing up in emerging tech and before that being a guitar player and a theater and all the rest of it, I saw that there was business value to be had by creatively creating new games as opposed to doggedly trying to win the one you're in. And so I think the way that shows up in my real life is, like, I love coaching little kids, teaching soccer. Let's do this. Let's run around. Let's have games within the games. When they get old enough where it's like, well, we're either going to win the conference or we're not. That's when I've learned, okay, I'm going to hand it over to some alpha dog who's really good at beating the competition. That's not my jam. Now, translating that to business, Robert, when I worked in the venture capital community, what I really recognized was so much of what got in the way of any given startup, it wasn't the quality of their ideas. It certainly wasn't their grit, right? There's this cult of hustle and grit right now. Like, hashtag hustle and grind. I'm working till midnight. So are a lot of people, right? The missing link for most is a relationship. I know a great person who could remove obstacles and create shortcuts for you. And the universe would be better in that game master way if you two got together and chopped it up. And so my big coaching would be, everybody be generous with relationships. Don't guard them as privileged access. Share them widely, because the future belongs to the game masters and the connectors. And I'll fall on that sword. I really believe that's where the economy is headed, is creators and connectors, not competitors and hoarders.
Well, you're definitely a game creator and master at that. And thanks for the time. Is there anything that I didn't ask you, anything you want to close with, or are we good where we are?
Man, let's all I'd ask is that we do it again sometime, Robert. I'm grateful for your coffee chats, and I look forward to chopping it up with you on the reg, as my 14-year-old would say.
Well, it's been great having you. Thank you so much. And with that, another Coffee with Mr. IT is coming to an end. If you missed any of today's show or past shows, click on the playlist on YouTube. We also have a podcast. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.